Nice to see everybody. Actually, can I just take this opportunity to thank everyone for making Jill and I feel so welcomed when we come here. It's not something we take for granted. You know, this odd couple that comes from a small island in the middle of the English Channel suddenly appears in your church. You know, that you've really made us feel really at home, and we do appreciate it. Right, I'm going to read God's word. Never a bad idea, in my opinion.
Amen.
I was going to read the reading is from John chapter 10. I was going to read quite a wodge of this, but I think for time reasons, I think I'll just read the central bit of what I want to look at. And I might refer back to something as I go along. John chapter 10, starting at verse 11. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd who owns the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. Amen. May God add a blessing to the reading. Praise God. Now, I probably don't need to tell you this, but you've got a lot of sheep in Wales. In Jersey, we don't have many sheep. It's a tiny island. They don't really have the pasture land for it. The Jersey cow is a big deal, obviously, in Jersey. There may be a dozen sheep on the whole of the island. But it seems that here, every time Jill and I go to walk the dog somewhere, we get out of the car, we fall over a sheep. In fact, there'd been places where we just park the car in the street somewhere, there'd be sheep walking down the middle of the road, just mooching around in people's gardens. And what always amazes me is that people seem to think it's quite normal. And I have to say, it really isn't. In fact, if that happened in Jersey, it would probably be in the local paper. So I've been thinking a lot about sheep, which is a bit sad, I know, but that's what's happened. It occurred to me that all of us, as the children of God, we are referred to as sheep in the Bible, probably more than anything else. So it set my train of thought. Quite literally, I've been thinking about sheep because I'm here. That's really. And Jill and I, we've been here for 10 years now, so you think I'd get over it. You see that right throughout the Bible, even with David, the psalmist himself, who of course was a shepherd, he used this analogy. In Psalm 100 verse 3 he said, "We are God's people and the sheep of his pasture." In Psalm 77:2 you wrote, "God, you lead your people like a flock." Psalm 79:13 says, "We, your people, and the sheep of your pasture will give you thanks forever." And of course, Psalm 23, which everybody knows, is, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." So, if we're not being referred to as sheep, then the Lord refers to himself as a shepherd, which means we're sheep. And it's not only in the Psalms do we see it, but we can see this parallel drawn between man and sheep, like in the book of Isaiah, chapter 40, verse 11, where it says that God tends his flock like a shepherd. He gathers the lambs in his arms and carries them close to his heart. He gently leads those that are with young. One of my favourite verses. And we could go on and on throughout the Bible with this kind of inference that we are similar to sheep. Inference, is that a word? Or I just made that up? I think it's a word. There's something very comforting about knowing that the Lord is our shepherd. I think that's the reason why Psalm 23 is often used when people are very distressed about it. It's used in funeral services quite a great deal, of course. I think when you're facing the loss of a loved one, when you're sad, when you're hurting, when you're confused, and you just don't know if you're going to get through this, and you hear the words, "The Lord is my shepherd," and it just speaks to something very deep within us. You see, God has placed in the hearts of us all the understanding that we really, really, really need a shepherd. We need somebody to keep us safe. We need somebody to guide us through all of the alleyways and byways of this existence, the vicissitudes of this life. We need someone to guide us through this minefield called life. So I had a look at sheep. Lockdown's been very bad for me, as you can tell. It's the kind of how exciting my life is. I spent a lot of time just looking at what sheep did. I looked at some of the attributes of sheep to try to discover exactly why we're compared to them so much. First of all, the first thing I have to say, and I'm sorry to say this, but sheep are really stupid. They can't really be caught. They could be taught. Secondly, sheep are dirty and wayward. You know, you look on Christmas cards sometimes, you see these little fluffy balls of cotton wool. You'd know as well as I, they're nothing like that. They smell really bad, and it's impossible for them to keep themselves clean. They're prone to wander. The trouble with the sheep is they can't see more than about 15 yards in front of themselves, apparently. So it doesn't matter how many times you round them up, they'll just wander off again. A sheep will never learn from its mistakes. Does that sound familiar? Another thing is they have no natural defence of their own. They've got no real bite, they have no claws, they can't raise themselves up on their hind legs and make themselves look intimidating. They're also top heavy with spindly legs, which makes them kind of slow, so they can't even run away quickly. And on top of all that, they're prone to all kinds of diseases. They get ill really easily. Fourthly, sheep are easily frightened and very confused. It's not unknown in some countries for sheep to get frightened and follow each other off a cliff to their death. Some time back I was reading something online from Wales Online or something. They were talking about these sheep that had found a discarded bag of marijuana in the field. It must have been thrown from a car, the police were chasing him or something, I guess. And they found it, and for days there were these stone sheep just walking around. I said they were stupid. So these are the animals that we are compared to in the Bible more than anything else. It's like God said, you see those smelly, defenceless, easily scared sheep down there? Well, that's you, that is. Thanks. Now, of course, he doesn't do it just to make the comparison, just to put us down. But he makes these comparisons to make us realise that we really need a shepherd. Amen. So when we read scriptures like Isaiah 53:6, where it says we all, like sheep, have gone astray, each of us has turned to his own way. Or Mark 9:36, where it says, when Jesus saw the crowds, he had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. This should remind us that we have this inborn, innate need for a shepherd. I'll just have a little drink if that's all right. I get very dry when I'm talking. It's just nerves. It's nerves, that's what it is. Not only do we need a shepherd, but there is only one who is qualified for the task. Amen. Only one who is capable of not only being a shepherd, but being the good shepherd. As Jesus said in the verse 12, the hired hand is not the shepherd who owns the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. Apparently, it was quite often they would get a couple of flocks together, and they would hire somebody from outside to come and look after the sheep. But because they were just a hired hand, they didn't care. In fact, Jesus refers to these hired men as robbers and thieves. And he said they would often just steal the sheep themselves. They weren't very trustworthy. You see, Jesus isn't the hired hand. He's not some stranger. Jesus knows us. You know, the relationship between sheep and shepherds was different in Israel than it is in other parts of the world. Like here in Britain, for example, most sheep are kept to be killed and eaten. But in Israel, they were kept for their wool and for their milk. So in Israel, often a shepherd would be with the sheep right from its birth, very often till the end of its life. These shepherds knew their sheep and would even give them individual names. And the same applies to Jesus. He's watched every man and woman since the beginning of the world. He knows everything about us. Jesus knows everything there is to know about each and every one of us. There isn't a single motivation that he doesn't know about. There isn't a single thought that we have put in our head. There's not a single act of anything that we've done. There isn't even a word that's escaped from our mouth that doesn't get the Lord's full and undivided attention. As Hebrews 4:13 puts it, all things are naked and open to the eyes of God. So he knows it all. I just scribbled something this morning which I thought was funny, but no, really, it's not that funny. I said there's no point in trying to pull the wool over his eyes. I would say no pun intended, but there was a pun intended. Anybody heard of Max Lucado? Anybody know? You know who Max Lucado is? I know he's not everybody's cup of tea. He's a bit kind of a glitzy, Hollywoody type. He's always on chat shows and all that. He's a very well-known writer and script writer and all kinds of things. He's written plays and films and stuff. But one thing you can rely on Max Lucado is he's always good for giving illustrations for something. He writes a good illustration. And he wrote this piece about the difference between cowboys and cows and shepherds and their sheep. And this is, I'll just read you what he wrote. Behold the hero of the American West, the cowboy. Behold the hero of the Bible, the shepherd. On the surface he appears similar to the cowboy. He too is rugged, he sleeps where the jackals howl, and he works where the wolves prowl. Never off duty, always alert. Like the cowboy, he makes his roof the stars and the pasture his home. But that is where the similarities end. You see, the shepherd loves his sheep. It's not that the cowboy doesn't appreciate the cow, it's just that he doesn't know the animal. He doesn't even want to. Have you ever seen a picture of a cowboy hugging a cow? Have you ever seen a shepherd with his arms around a sheep? Of course you have. Why the difference? Simple. The cowboy leads the cow to slaughter. The shepherd leads the sheep to be shorn. The cowboy wants the meat of the cow, the shepherd wants the wool of the sheep. And so they treat animals differently. The cowboy drives the cattle, the shepherd leads the sheep. A herd of cattle has a dozen cowboys. A flock has one shepherd. The cowboy wrestles, brands, herds and ropes. The shepherd leads, guides, feeds and anoints. The cowboy knows the names of all the other trail hands. The shepherd knows the names of the sheep. The cowboy hoops and hollers at the cow. The shepherd calls each sheep by name. And he finishes by saying, "Aren't we glad Christ didn't call himself the good cowboy?" I hope you're getting the picture.
Yeah.
Jesus is the good shepherd because he knows us. And not only does he know us, but we also recognise him when he calls. In fact, this is how shepherds proved ownership in Jesus' day. They never used to brand them, apparently. Each shepherd had his own distinct call, and the sheep would only respond to that call. I read a story, apparently a true story, from the days of World War I, when a group of Turkish soldiers, I didn't know there were Turkish soldiers in Israel in World War I, but apparently there was, came to one of the hills near Jerusalem. They stole a large number of sheep. The shepherd had been asleep, and when he woke up, and he kind of looked around, he realised that some of his sheep were missing. He looked down, he saw his sheep a few hills further along, being led by this group of soldiers. And of course he couldn't do anything about it. He was a defenceless young lad on his own, against these armed soldiers. So he did the only thing that he knew he could do. He went up on a hill, and he began to put his hands to his mouth, and he called the unique call. The one that he always used with his sheep. And when he did, their ears pricked up, they stopped, they turned around and they just trotted back to him. Because you see, they'd had enough of a relationship with him just to know his voice. I said I'd refer, but I just want to read from verse 1 of John chapter 10. Just a few verses. This was as Jesus talking. I'll tell you the truth, anyone who sneaks over the wall of a sheepfold, rather than going through the gate, must surely be a thief and a robber. But the one who enters through the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep recognize his voice and come to him. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. After he has gathered his own flock, he walks ahead of them, and they follow him because they know his voice. They won't follow a stranger. They will run from him because they don't know his voice. Those who heard Jesus use this illustration didn't understand what he meant, so he explained it to them. I'll tell you the truth, I am the gate for the sheep. All who came before me were thieves and robbers, but the true sheep did not listen to them. Yes, I am the gate. Those who come in through me will be saved. They will come and go freely and will find good pastures. The reason why Jesus calls himself the gate is that shepherds would often build I forgot the expression.
Pen.
A pen, that'll do. Like a pen, often made out of stones, and they would put thorns on top around it to keep predators out, and there would be a little gateway which he would block up with branches, and the shepherd would sleep in front. He would sleep in front of the gateway, so if anything tried to come in and harm his sheep, he would be there. So he's like the gatekeeper, and that's what Jesus is referring to. I think it's a wonderful illustration. The good shepherd being the gatekeeper, keeping you safe. You know, like sheep, we know Jesus' voice. I'll tell you a little bit, just a few minutes about my own experience. I apologise to Pastor because I told him the story when he first came to see me about a couple of months back. But you know, I've often been a Christian all my life since I was 14. To cut a long story short, when I was married with 2 children, my first wife left me, and I was left with 2 teenage daughters to look after. I was in a leadership position in our church, and generally quite well looked up to because not just somebody who just did things. We just did stuff. I got involved, and on the small islands you get noticed. You know, in different churches, we used to work with different churches, and if something cropped up, I was always one of the first ones to get involved. But in my heart, I began to get further and further away. My heart began to grow cold. And I always tell people, you know, that although, you know, my wife left me, that's a reason, not an excuse. You know, I never give an excuse. It's inexcusable to come away from God. But little by little, I began to slip further and further away from him, further out of the care and protection of the Good Shepherd. And it came to a crunch when one New Year's Eve, I was in a club, in a bar actually, with some friends of mine that I worked with, and it was on New Year's Eve. And I stood there, and I remember this club was kind of renowned at the time for being a sort of singles bar. It's where you went to pick a woman up. I mean, it's a sordid tale. You know, all kinds of things happened over the 2.5-year period of my life, and I wasn't a very nice person actually to know. And that's where it culminated in that, and I was standing there thinking, I don't know what I'm doing here. I had that moment, you know, like the prodigal son. That's the way I look at God. You talk about brain fog, I'm as bad as you today. The prodigal son, I had a prodigal son moment where, you know, I sat in the pigsty and thought, and the authorised version said he came to himself. Yeah. And I had one of those moments, like a light bulb moment. I don't know what I'm doing here. And I remember putting my drink down that I didn't even like. I didn't like alcohol very much. And I just walked back through the streets, back to where I was, the little flat I was living in at the time. And I remember I lived behind a big Roman Catholic church. And they started to ring the bells because it was midnight for the New Year. They were ringing in the New Year. I remember that quite distinctly, and I went and I laid down, but I sat down by the side of my bed, and I just said, I remember saying quite distinctly, Lord, if I was you, I wouldn't have me back. Because I'd done some terrible things that couple of years, involved in relationships I shouldn't have been. It was just horrible. It's very sordid. And it's not something I'm proud of. But I knew he would have me back, because his word said he would. So I started going to, there were 2 Elam churches in Jersey. I was in leadership in one, but they found out what I was up to and they weren't very happy. So I went to the other one, and I just became part of the church there and just sat and involved. And little by little, God began to restore back to me what I'd lost. And eventually, of course, I was able to marry this lovely lady here. And incidentally, in a couple of months' time, we're having our silver wedding. It'll be our 25th anniversary. Did I deserve any of that? Of course not. Absolutely not. None of us does. I knew what I deserved. The thing is, you see, the wolves were circling. I was unprotected, of my own making. It was my own fault. And yet I heard the shepherd's unique call. My ears pricked up, and I ran back to him. Some time back, Jill and I were watching a programme that was presented on BBC Wales. It was presented by Kate Humble. Some of you will know who she is. She did this documentary about the Welsh sheepdog, which apparently is a dying breed. Mm-hmm. And she said, and she had one of her own. I think she lived in Wales. She might still do. And she went around visiting working dogs and their owners to see what they did. And one of the people that she visited was a shepherd who worked for the Welsh Forestry Commission or whatever it's called. And his job was to go into forest and to find sheep that didn't belong to anyone, who had escaped or gone rogue. And the dog had been trained to get a sheep against a tree and not let it go. And of course, because they were wild, they were really woolly, very heavy with wool. And he would go up, big guy, flat cap, beard, and you go up to the sheep, tie its legs together, lift it up, put it on his shoulder and carry off to his Land Rover, where he would put them. If he could return them, he would. If not, they'd put some in new flocks somewhere and keep them safe. Like I say, some of them had been shorn for years, so they were extremely heavy. You see, and it occurred to me that when I saw that, it doesn't matter how heavy the burden it is that you carry. It doesn't matter how much life has placed on you. It's never too heavy for the Good Shepherd to put you on his shoulders and carry you to safety. And then he will remove the burden from you. As I tell people quite often, Jesus' shoulders are very broad. Psalm 23, of course, says this: "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters." Now, I've always found that a very comforting thing, that thing, lead me by still waters. I don't know if they used to do that this year, but when I was a young boy, the Gideon people used to come in and give you a little New Testament. Those in the schools, they used to have them all. They'd probably be arrested if they did that now. But it was a New Testament and Psalms and a little red book. And I would come from a non-Christian home. I didn't know anything about it, but I used to read it when I was about, 11, I guess. And that psalm, and that bit there in particular, I went through a stage for no particular reason. Well, I was very upset about things and worried about stuff. You go through stuff as a kid, not for any particular reason, it just happened. And I used to find that one thing where it said he leads me beside still waters. Didn't understand it, but I always found it very comforting. And what I discovered was that shepherds would often make a breakwater because sheep apparently will not drink from running water, they're too scared. And they've got some justification for feeling scared because of their spindly legs. You know, they go into running water, they can easily get swept away and downstream to their doom. So he would prepare like a stone L-shaped thing so that they had somewhere safe to drink. You see, the thing is, even when the waters rage, the good shepherd will keep you safe. He may not still the waters completely. Sometimes he does, but usually he doesn't. But he will provide you with that safe area. He will lead you by still waters. You may feel that there are times when you're about to be swept away. We all get moments like that in our lives. I can certainly think of many, actually, in my life over the years where I just didn't know where to turn. But he leads you by still waters. Now, of course, I don't know everybody's story here. You know a bit more about me this morning, obviously. I'm an open book, generally speaking. But it may be that there have been times when you beginning to wander in your heart. I don't know, because I don't know, what's going on. It's even possible to be a regular churchgoer. You may even be a staunch person of the church that people look up to. That's what happened to me. People would say, good old Jeff, despite all that he's going through, he's still going on with God, still doing his bit. He's still getting involved. And yet in my heart I was wandering further and further away from him. Yeah. But even so, he called me back. Yeah. You see, it's never too late. I came across an expression. Actually, in fact, it was Jill that told me about it a couple of days ago. This happens all the time with Jill, by the way. When I'm preparing a sermon, she comes up with something that she's read somewhere or something that always applies. Happened last time as well, I was preaching. And she said, have you heard of a cast sheep? No. They said, you might want to read this. It's something she was reading online. And apparently a cast sheep is when the sheep gets so heavy that it becomes so top heavy that it turns turtle, goes on its back, and it literally can't move. And it relies on the shepherd to pick it back up and put it on his feet. It's okay to be vulnerable before God. I think, particularly as Pentecostals, we're not that good at it sometimes. We want to soldier on, don't we? We want to be God's soldiers. And of course there is a time for that, actually. There are times, I think, when God wants us to stand on our own 2 feet. He wants us to do things for ourselves. Yeah, you've got this, just do it. But there are going to be times when you could be a cast sheep. The time when you just feel that completely helpless. And one of the things I've told people many times over the years, Jill and I have spoken to dozens and dozens of people, usually in our role as house group leaders in Jersey. Our pastor used to regularly send us people. I used to make a joke with him, so you couldn't send us somebody normal for a change, could you? But he knew that we didn't counsel people. We're not counsellors, but we just came alongside and chatted to people and offered advice if we could. And one thing I used to tell people quite regularly is it's okay to let God carry you sometimes. There are times when you do things for yourself, but when things get really tough, he will pick you up and he will carry you for a while, for a season. If you feel lost and lonely, or if you're feeling burdened down by the weight of all that stuff that you have to carry, or even if you're prone to wandering, perhaps you feel that the waters are raging around you, and you feel that those spindly little sheep legs are about to be whisked away from under you. The Good Shepherd is right here. He's right here to calm the waters and to bring you home. So be of good cheer. Thank you so much for listening.
Amen.
I'll pick up all the bits and pieces.